all LSTR holders essentially earned a 330% yield by simply holding LSTR, which is absolutely crazy. It's $3.22. So as I'm recording this, the LSTR price is $3.22. It's up 257% since the presale ended on August 4th. But you don't usually buy into like a stock or a business or token expecting that in a single year you'll get paid back the entire value 3 times over. And if you were to apply that in the way that, for example, the stock market's applying it to MicroStrategy, if you were to apply that to LeoStrategy, the MNAV would be through the fucking roof. Leo's up like 500% this month, or in the past like 2 or 3 months since Leo 2.0. Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. As you can see, I've got a nice little new setup. We'll see how it does with the new mic. Kind of curious to see. So if you were following the AMAs and maybe some of the videos, I needed a new mic setup because this new room that I'm in is very echoey. Got some suggestions to basically get the mic as close to my mouth as possible and then reduce the gain to almost nothing. So we will see how this sounds. You guys can let me know in the comments. We've got the AMA tomorrow, Tuesday, noon Eastern, but I thought it would be cool to both do an update video on some of the LeoStrategy stuff and also kind of test the new setup. So we will kill 2 birds with 1 stone, as they like to say. So I basically just pulled up the LeoStrategy thread. You can see I just pulled this thread up and I'm just looking at the images they shared of the new dashboard app that's coming. So the dashboard app looks amazing, by the way. I really love the way it looks. And let's just go through some of these numbers because I did a video last week, honestly, it was like 4 or 5 days ago. And I was talking about some of these LeoStrategy numbers and the yield. I think the title of that video was LeoStrategy is generating 195% yield for LSTR holders. Well, the new numbers are out and they seem to be doing these every Monday. So maybe I'll do a video every Monday if they continue to put out the stats. So they put out these numbers. Obviously, it's got all the updated figures. So this week, they now have over 2.3 million Leo held by LeoStrategy. The current net asset value of that, the Leo NAV, is $303,832. So you get that by obviously just taking the current Leo price, multiply it by the Leo holdings, and you get that 300,000 figure. The Leo yield, notably, from last week to, so basically to get the Leo yield, you just look at the holdings last week, the total amount of Leo that was held by LeoStrategy, and then you compare it to the Leo held by LeoStrategy this week, and the total amount of Leo held increased by 6.35%. So that gives you the week-to-date yield, or week-to-date yield of 6.35%. And then if you annualize that, so you basically just take that multiplied by 52 to get, if that week happened for 52 weeks, you'd get an annual yield of 330%. So basically all LSTR holders, and I hold a pretty significant amount of LSTR, all LSTR holders essentially earned a 330% yield by simply holding LSTR, which is absolutely crazy. So if you remember the week prior, they made 195%, was the annualized yield based on the week-to-date yield from the week prior. So things are accelerating, and we've been talking about this, and I've been talking about this in videos and posts and threads that, a strategy company, whether it's MicroStrategy or LeoStrategy, as they scale, the scale itself creates more scale. So as LeoStrategy scales, as there's more net asset, you see this net asset value up here in the top right. As that net asset value increases, it increases the optionality of LeoStrategy. And what that means is it increases the ways that they can generate revenue and capital in order to purchase more Leo. So where things get fascinating is as this scale continues to grow, how does LeoStrategy come up with new ways to, essentially get new capital and generate new revenue? And as they do those things, they are essentially just able to continue to buy more Leo. So I'm very excited to see how this progresses. So the week-to-date gain in terms of actual Leo, and again, all these numbers, you can verify them all yourself, but you literally can use all these numbers in order to get the other numbers. So the week-to-date gain of Leo, that's a tongue twister, is 137,458. So that gain essentially just means that's how much Leo that they added to the balance sheet over the last week, over the last 7 days. The dollar value of that 137,000 Leo is $18,000. So that's the dollar gain for LSTR holders this week. The Leo dollar gain annualized is $943,000. So that's how much essentially USD value of Leo they'd be adding to their balance sheet. All else being equal, if they added at this pace and the Leo price didn't increase, that would be the dollar value gain to LSTR hold. The Leo gain would be 7.15 million. So basically, if you take the 137,000 that they acquired over the past 7 days and you annualize that, they would acquire over 7 million more Leo over the course of a year. And then the Leo volume numbers, those are monthly numbers, so they didn't actually change from the last update to this dashboard that we've seen from them. Pulling up the next screenshot here, and I just recentered it. The current LSTR price, and you've probably been seeing me thread about this because it's been awesome to watch, is $3.22. So as I'm recording this, the LSTR price is $3.22. It's up 257% since the presale ended on August 4th. And with the new acquisitions of Leo this week, so obviously in the last slide, you can see the total Leo holdings by LeoStrategy is 2.3 million. So there's 100,000 LSTR shares that are out there. So you get an LPS or Leo per share of 23.018. So if you multiply that 23.018 by the current Leo price, then you get the LPS in USD, which is $3.03. So that essentially means that all else being the same, each share of LSTR should be worth no less than $3.03 because the net asset value or the holdings of LeoStrategy in terms of Leo on the balance sheet are literally $3 per share. LSTR is trading at a slight premium, which you can look at the current MNAV of 1.06, which means that LSTR is trading at a 6% premium. Let me get into that in a second. The 30-day performance, I already talked about, 257%. Obviously, LSTR has only been live for 30 days since the presale ended, and then it restates their Leo holdings, the holdings value, and the amount of LSTR shares that are out there. And then the LSTR equity value is actually wrong here. So maybe what it did? I think it just multiplied the LPS. So they'll probably fix that before this is live. Again, these are just screenshots. So I know Task asked on the last video if I had early access. I don't have early access to the actual website. So I'm just looking at the screenshots they shared. So anyways, the MNAV at 1.06 trading at a 6% premium. I actually think this is a very discounted premium. So it's kind of an oxymoron, but given the rate of accumulation, so going back to this slide, the rate of accumulation right now is at 330% a year. So the way to value a strategy company, and obviously in the last video, LSTR was actually trading at a discount. So I think people are starting to kind of understand, how a strategy company should be valued, because now the value is going from a discount to a premium, which I definitely think LSTR should be trading at a premium. And I've been kind of screaming that since the discount. So the reason why I think it should trade at a much higher than 6% premium, and you can go to the other videos to see that I said the same thing even when it was at a discount. The reason why I think it should trade a lot higher is because of that rate of accumulation. So accumulating 330% annualized Leo yield means that the balance sheet is growing at 6.35% per week, right? So you need to value, and the way strategy companies are valued is you need to not only value the Leo on the balance sheet today, the LPS today, you also have to forecast and speculate on the LPS tomorrow. So this is why companies like MicroStrategy, and you're welcome to go pull up, bitcointreasuries.org. Honestly, let me just, Bitcoin Treasuries, or it's bitcointreasuries.net. Let's see, bitcointreasuries.net. Here we go. So I'm just pulling it up to make it even easier. So you can see, for example, MSTR is trading at a 1.312 MNAV. So they're trading at a 31% premium to their Bitcoin holdings. And by the way, this is a pretty compressed MNAV relative to where they're usually trading. And then you can see like Riot is trading at 2.3. Where's Metaplanet is trading at 1.482. So the MNAVs tend to trade at obviously different valuations. But the reason why you have an MNAV premium on most strategy companies, unless it's honestly mismanaged, is because people are speculating on how fast the new accumulation will happen. For example, with MSTR, people are valuing not only the current 1-to-1 Bitcoin on their balance sheet, they're adding a 31% premium to the Bitcoin on the balance sheet because they're essentially speculating that it's, MicroStrategy is going to add 31% more Bitcoin to their balance sheet at some point in the near future, and that is soon enough that they're willing to price it in today. I heard someone explain this, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but someone explained this really well where they were talking about PE ratios and essentially the long term, literally in books about the stock market going back 50 years. or even more. And they were talking about, like PE ratios and measuring companies based on earnings. And essentially that by buying a company today, you're not only paying for the earnings it's getting today, you're paying for the earnings you expect it to make in the future. So you may buy a business on the stock market at essentially 3 times earnings, right? And then you do a calculation of how long does it take for that investment to pay back the value of those future earnings. And that's how a lot of value investors actually look at companies, like Warren Buffett, for example. And I know it's kind of crazy to think about using like a Warren Buffett type strategy when you're looking at strategy companies, but it actually does apply. It just applies to the MNAV instead of PE. So I think it's kind of interesting to think about, the kind of use case of that, but applied to the strategy concept of accumulation of a hard asset. And Leo is obviously a hard asset now since Leo 2.0. There's only 30 million Leo out there. It makes Leo much more like a commodity, for example. A whole other topic for another video. But my point is, if you expect that LeoStrategy will continue to accumulate Leo at any pace, really any pace even closely resembling to 330% yield, well, how long are you willing to hold LSTR? And that will tell you what MNAV you should value it at. So if you're willing to hold, actually, here's a really good lens. So right now it's trading at a 6% premium, right? Over the last week, LeoStrategy added 6.35% in Leo yield. So this will actually, the math on this will work really nicely. Basically, by buying LeoStrategy today, LSTR tokens, you're saying that you're valuing LeoStrategy at the current holdings of the balance sheet, which gives you the 1. And then with the 6% premium, you're valuing it with 1 week worth of earnings, 1 week worth of accumulation, essentially, which is, what you can replace with the word earnings. So essentially, the value of LSTR being at 1.06 premium is signaling that you're willing to buy it today and hold it for 1 week. And if you're willing to hold it for longer than a week, then you need to add that value in. For example, if you're going to hold it for a year, well, now the MNAV premium should be really over 3, like 3 to 4 plus would be the MNAV premium, which would put, and I'm going to do some live math, so forgive me if anything's wrong, but let's just say 3.3 would be the MNAV. Multiply that by the current, let's see here, next slide. Multiply that by the current LPS in USD, which would be 3.038, and that would put LSTR at $10.02. So if you valued LSTR at 1 year worth of this rate of Leo accumulation, so you basically are saying, I'm willing to buy 1 LSTR today, I'm going to hold it for a year, and over the course of that year, LSTR is going to continue to accumulate Leo at the pace they've been accumulating. And I actually think they're going to grow. They're going to accumulate faster for the reasons I mentioned at the beginning of this video. But you're basically signaling that you're willing to hold LSTR for 1 year. And over the course of that 1 year, you're going to get paid essentially that MNAV premium that you're paying today is going to get closed. The gap of that is going to get closed over the course of 12 months. And then the actual MNAV, like the 1-to-1 net asset value on the balance sheet will reach $10 per LSTR. So I hope that makes sense. It's obviously gets really into the weeds of all this financial engineering and securities analysis, essentially. And again, like there's literally a book called Security Analysis where they talk about these concepts like PE ratios and whatnot. So I've been, watching video. I mean, I'm learning all of this in real time like everybody else. But, I've been watching a lot of those videos and just really fascinated by all these concepts, really taking from like old concepts, but applying them to like this whole new era of a company. So I really like what LeoStrategy is doing here. And I think this dashboard is going to be a huge help in terms of explaining things to people. Because, I mean, even for me, like doing these videos, looking at the dashboard and seeing these stats makes everything make a lot more sense. So anyways, I hope that kind of describes why I think the MNAV premium could be a lot higher. I think if LeoStrategy was trading at like a 3x, like a 3 MNAV, I still think that would be undervalued. And that might sound crazy, but usually you don't buy a business or you don't buy into a business, and I'm using that in quotations, but you don't usually buy into like a stock or a business or token expecting that in a single year you'll get paid back the entire value 3 times over. So it really just goes to show you how fast they're accumulating Leo. And if you were to apply that in the way that, for example, the stock market's applying it to MicroStrategy, if you were to apply that to LeoStrategy, the MNAV would be through the fucking roof. I mean, and I'm not saying that lightly. Like, it would be crazy if the same kind of template was applied here. And I think we're slowly getting to that place. I think people are slowly starting to wrap their minds around these concepts. And I really think that, LeoStrategy has stated that their goal is to accumulate 10 million Leo by the end of this year. I think they're going to accumulate that, and I think they're going to accumulate even more than that, especially in the years to come. But even possibly by the end of this year, they could have more than 10 million Leo, which obviously is going to send the Leo price through because there's only 30 million Leo out there. Between POL and LSTR, they already have almost 3 million, which is 10% of the supply. So basically 90% of the supply is left. I know there's plenty of people out there who don't plan to sell their Leo. Between what is actually available out there, and then also there's lost Leo in old accounts that have lost their keys over the years and whatnot. So, kind of similar to a Bitcoin situation. I mean, there's really not that many coins actually out there. So if LeoStrategy accumulates to 10 million and then keeps going from there, they're going to be buying into a very scarce pool of Leo that's out there. So I'm very excited to see how that goes. So I think two more things here, and I'll wrap this up because it's been 17 minutes. The surge price, 79 cents, stated yield 15%, effective yield 19%. I'll just run through this super fast because there's nothing super new here. But yeah, there's been over $1,000 distributed since, Surge started distributing dividends. So that's been awesome to see. And I'm cutting this off a little bit, but let me see if I can just make it a little smaller. This is a new page that we haven't seen from LeoStrategy before. Making it a little smaller. All right, it's kind of small, but you can at least see everything. So this is a new page that we haven't seen before. It looks like we're going to get charts. So charts of all sorts of data related to LeoStrategy. Again, this is modeled very similarly to MicroStrategy, but you can see like the LPS growth, for example, from the last time I did the video to today. So the LPS before was under, what was that, 21.5 on September 1st. And on September 8th, it is now, approaching 23 and change. So a little bit over 23. It actually says the number there, 23.018. So the weekly growth is 6.35% from last week. So we already obviously know these numbers. The actual LPS increase is 1.375. So that means that there's 100,000 LSTR shares out there, and they added 1.375 Leo per share of LSTR outstanding. That's how you get that LPS metric. And then, just a disclaimer about the real-time data. But if you look at the top menu, you can see Leo, which we saw at the first slide. LSTR was the second slide. Surge was the third slide we looked at. And then charts is the fourth slide that we're now looking at. And it looks like there's a purchases and data section that's also coming. So it'll be interesting to see all of that. I think they actually did post a little teaser of the purchases, and that looks cool. It basically just looks like all the individual buys that you can see in a breakdown. And then the description of the data page that they talked about is essentially being able to download all the data so that you could self-verify, everything if you wanted to. Anyways, I think it's really cool to see all this data laid out in this format, this really digestible dashboard. I mean, it's nothing innovative or crazy new or anything. It's just essentially taking what MicroStrategy has done really well with Bitcoin and applying it to Leo and making things really easy to understand. These are obviously kind of in the trenches of finance in terms of concepts, but what they're really building here is a second layer financial network on the Leo economy. And I think with Leo 2.0, we turned Leo essentially into a commodity asset. It's hyper scarce. There's only 30 million and there can never be more. And the bridges burn Leo, so it actually is less than 30 million with every single passing day. So time is on our side, as opposed to the opposite, which is, having an inflationary economy where time is fighting against you. And as many of us know, if you fight against time, you're going to lose. So Leo's new setup really makes it so that it benefits from time. So the more that time passes, the more Leo gets burned, the more Leo that gets, bought up by the protocol Leo, which is already at like 400 or 500,000, I think. And the more Leo that gets bought up by LeoStrategy, which is now at 2.3 million. And then obviously the SERP is buying and distributing Leo every day. So Leo is getting scooped up off the market. And I've been watching very closely what's happening on the order books for Leo. And what I'm seeing is, there's a lot of old sellers out there. Which is great. They should take some profits. I mean, Leo's up like 500% this month, or in the past like 2 or 3 months since Leo 2.0. So I love that people are able to take profits and best wishes to them. Let them rotate out and let the accumulation for things like LeoStrategy really take place. And we'll see massive growth because of that. So I'm excited to see what LeoStrategy does in the future. They released a blog post today. Let's see if I can just pull it up for everybody really quickly, because I do want everybody to go out there and read what LeoStrategy is up to, because it's really fascinating. I mean, even if you don't touch any of this stuff, at least read and be curious about it, because I think it's extremely fascinating. So they talked in their post today about the Surge and LSTR launch that's happening on Base, and there's a lot of really good details here about what they plan to do. One of the things I'm most excited for is the liquidity pools. I think those are going to be absolutely, the number one driver of revenue for LeoStrategy, and the reason why, they talked about it a little bit here. But the liquidity pool design encourages volatility by creating arbitrage triangles. So by having an anchor pool, and they talked about this in a previous blog post, by having an anchor pool where, Surge, and you can see them here, Surge and LSTR are paired to USDC. So those are called anchor pools. And then you have the wrapped ETH pools that create volatility. Well, that creates an arb loop in and of itself. Then you also have the pairs on Hive Engine where LSTR and Surge are paired to Hive in the order book, and they're paired to Leo in the pools. Well, now you've got this really nice arbitrage triangle that's happening, and it essentially just creates volatility for all the different assets. And the reason why that volatility is good, and Michael Saylor talks about this, volatility is vitality for a strategy company. The reason why he says that is primarily because MicroStrategy actually issues shares to the market. While there's volatility, they issue more shares into that volatility. That's just one side of things. What gets really interesting is if you can harvest the volatility with a market maker. And LeoStrategy has already launched their market maker on Hive Engine. I've been watching it, and I know that they're working on the cross-chain market maker as well. So as we see those things grow, they're essentially going to turn this volatility into profit, and they're going to use that profit to buy more Leo for the LeoStrategy balance sheet, which then will let them expand the product offerings and grow and scale LSTR, Surge, and anything else that comes in the future. And by growing those and scaling those, it will create more volatility, more liquidity pools, and essentially just more market making opportunities for LeoStrategy. And the flywheel spins, because then, they're obviously arbitraging, they're making profits, they're using those profits to reinvest into more Leo, and the cycle just continues to repeat. So I'm very fascinated by all this stuff, very excited, obviously very focused on Leo Dex, but just kind of, it's fun being like a bystander or sideline, watching from the sidelines as another team builds, really great stuff in the Leo ecosystem, because usually it's obviously just the Leo team building stuff. But this is really awesome to see, and I hope you guys are as excited as I am. You can probably tell I'm excited because I keep doing these videos and just rambling for 25 or 30 minutes. So if you stuck with me, thanks for listening to this. Hopefully the audio is much better than before. And set a reminder for tomorrow, noon Eastern, we will be returning for the Leo AMA. So thanks, everybody. See you soon.